I entered a 100 plus person Pokemon tournament with a Pokemon that nobody else was using. That Pokemon was Gholdengo. Now, that might seem a little bit strange. After all, Gholdengo was dominating the last format, so why did everyone drop it? Well, in the new format, every player is allowed to use one restricted Pokemon, which means that you get one super powerful legendary Pokemon. Calyrex Shadow is on the rise, a Pokemon that just so happens to one-hit KO Gholdengo with Astral Barrage, meaning that Gholdengo loses a lot of defensive merit. So, what restricted will I be using? Calyrex Ice, a Pokemon with an abysmal Calyrex Shadow matchup. However, my Gholdengo is trained in a special way. My Gholdengo has the Terra type of Normal to become completely immune to Calyrex Shadow, and the Life Orb item to threaten damage even without a nasty plot. My restricted, Calyrex Ice, is used to sweep both inside and outside of Trick Room, making good use of its insane bulk and high damage output. I decide to give it Terra Fire in order to be immune to Will-O-Wisp, and give it Clear Amulet to ignore Incineroar even more. This team needs a little bit of support, so I decide to add Incineroar and Amoonguss, the two most standard support Pokemon. I give Incineroar the safety goggles so I don't auto-lose to Amoonguss in Trick Room, along with the standard moveset. I also decide to make it Terra Ghost, so I can sit in front of fighting types like Urshifu, and also because Ghost isn't actually a bad defensive type for Incineroar. As for Amoonguss, I decide to give it the most standard set, with Terra Water, Rocky Helmet, and Spore, since it's so good into the Calyrex Ice Mirror. The most interesting thing about my Amoonguss is that it actually isn't maximum speed. With a speed IV of 27, it can underspeed opposing Calyrex Ice Rider and Ursaluna. This team looks like a decent start, but I want a Pokemon that can work outside of Trick Room, and a little extra help inside of Trick Room doesn't sound bad either. I first decide to use Urshifu Dark, since it has insane damage output and can hit a lot of things neutrally. It's also good into Calyrex Shadow, which as previously mentioned is very threatening. I give it the Focus Sash to give it a little more survivability, and Terra Dark to boost its damage even more. For the last slot, I wanted to use Iron Hands, since it's very good inside of Trick Room and has a good amount of bulk. That allows me to go for a mode where I cycle Incineroar and Amoonguss beside Iron Hands to make it almost unkillable. So, that's the team I decide on. My goal is to get top 16 at this tournament. I want to find a team concept for my next regional championships that award points to qualify for the world championships, and there aren't going to be a lot of massive tournaments before then, so I want to make everyone count. In order to top cut this specific tournament, I need to win 5 out of 7 best of 1 Swiss rounds, which will allow me to make it to top 32 or top 16, depending on how I do. From that point on, the tournament becomes best of 3, and any loss will eliminate me from the tournament. Round 1, I pull a pretty scary team. Zacian, Landorus Incarnate, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Ogerpon Teal, Incineroar, and Tornadus. I lead Calyrex and Iron Hands into their Ogerpon and Landorus. I fake out the Ogerpon slot as they switch it to Incineroar and as they Earth Power my Iron Hands. My Calyrex then follows up by setting out Trick Room, allowing me to move first against every Pokemon on their team. Turn 2, I predict them to double attack my Calyrex, so I protect it. They call this and Terra Ghost their Landorus and fake out my Iron Hands. Landorus finished off my Iron Hands with an Earth Power. This may look bad for me, but this is actually completely fine. Unlike my Incineroar, their Incineroar holds the Rocky Helmet, not the safety goggles. But they have Terra Grass to beat Amoonguss. However, they already used Terra on Landorus, allowing me to safely bring in Amoonguss and click Rage Powder and Glacial Lance. They also don't have Flare Blitz, meaning that Amoonguss is under no threat from a knockout. They switch Incineroar to Ogerpon as I Rage Powder and Glacial Lance. Glacial Lance picks up the Ogerpon and puts the Landorus in range of another Glacial Lance. Landorus Earth Powers my Amoonguss and does some chip damage to it. They bring in Incineroar for the dead Ogerpon, threatening Fake Out, but here's the thing. Right now, Amoonguss can sport either slot, and Glacial Lance threatens the knockout on their Landorus. They have a safe play, which is fake out Amoonguss to stop it from putting anything to sleep, then switch Landorus to Zacian, which is likely their last Pokemon. I could read this play and high horsepower either slot for the KO, but then they can double up on my Calyrex, putting it in range of a double up after Trick Room expires. I decide just to click Glacial Lance and Spore. They switch Landorus to Zacian, and fake out my Amoonguss and I Glacial Lance for some chip. Incineroar typically don't carry Protect, so this play then gives me a free knockout into that slot. They switch Incineroar to Landorus and protect Zacian, allowing me to take the Landorus for free as Spore goes into the Protect. Trick Room expires and I double Protect, catching the Fake Out and the Behemoth Blade into my Calyrex. In order to live the double up from Zacian and Incineroar, I Terra my Calyrex to fire and click Rage Powder. They Behemoth Blade my Amoonguss, knocking it out as they Will-O-Wisp my Calyrex, which fails due to the Terra. I high horsepower Zacian, knocking it out, and with just Incineroar, they can no longer win, and they forfeit. Round 2, I play against Miraidon, another scary matchup. Miraidon, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Ogerpon Fire, Whimsicott, Frigoraph, and Iron Hands. I lead Calyrex and Amoonguss, they lead Miraidon and Frigoraph. Turn 1, I protect both Pokemon to Scout, and they Volt Switch my Amoonguss and Psychic Noise it. I Rage Powder to redirect the Volt Switch as they bring in Iron Hands, and I click Glacial Lance to chip both slots. They Psychic Noise my Amoonguss and it lives on exactly 1 HP. I switch Amoonguss into Incineroar to get some health back and protect Calyrex, expecting them to double it. They fake out my Incineroar and Foul Play my Calyrex, doing essentially no damage that turn. I Terra my Calyrex and knock off the Frigoraph to put it in range of Glacial Lance next turn, as they Foul Play my Calyrex and I knock out the Iron Hands with high horsepower. They bring in Miraidon and Terra it to Fairy as they Helping Hand it. I protect Calyrex and they Electro Drift Incineroar, killing it in 1 hit. I bring in Amoonguss and redirect the Electro Drift. They then switch Ogerpon for Miraidon, and I Rage Powder the Psychic Noise into my Amoonguss, sacrificing it, but I get a Glacial Lance off, knocking out Frigoraph and putting Ogerpon in range of another Lance. They bring Miraidon back in and I fake it out, as they Ivy Cudgel my Terra Calyrex and I click Trick Room, sealing the game. From this point, a Glacial Lance and Low Kick wins me the game. Round 3 I play against my absolute worst matchup. Calyrex Shadow, InDDF, Galar Weezing, Dondozo, Tatsugiri, and Water Urshifu. It'd be a miracle if I could win this one. They lead Weezing and Urshifu into my Urshifu and Amoonguss. This lead is actually pretty good for me. They can attack with Urshifu, but if a Rage Powder comes out from my end, then they are in huge trouble. If they want to switch the Urshifu, they are forced either into the Calyrex mode, both get OHKO'd by Wicked Blow, or they go into Dozo and eat a lot of damage. I switch my Calyrex in for my Urshifu, as they close combat my Calyrex and Dazzling Gleam, and I Spore the Urshifu. This turn is good for me, but this game is not over. The Urshifu takes his guaranteed sleep turn as they Toxic Spikes, and I high horsepower the Weezing and Pollen Puff myself for the healing. They switch Urshifu to Dondozo as I Rage Powder and they Poison Gas. I click Lance and knock out the Weezing, giving them the free switch. Oops. They switch into Urshifu? This could mean that they don't have Tatsugiri, but this is also their optimal play. If they were to switch into Tatsugiri right away, then I don't feel threatened by that slot at all, and can only worry about the Dondozo. But if they bring in Urshifu, they can threaten me with an attack, or they can just switch into Tatsugiri, providing the same effect as if they had just brought it in, but forcing a 50-50 as well. They switch Urshifu into Tatsugiri and Terra Grass the Dondozo. I switch Amoonguss into Incineroar and get poisoned by the spikes, as I protect Calyrex and they Body Press into my Protect. Then I fake out Dondozo and set up Trick Room. I switch my Calyrex to Urshifu as they protect the Dondozo, and Will-O-Wisp goes into the Protect. I Terra Dark my Urshifu, and Will-O-Wisp connects with the Dondozo, and I Wicked Blow it, doing massive damage. They Body Press my Urshifu, but I live thanks to the burn. I Parting Shot my Incineroar into Amoonguss and Wicked Blow the Dondozo for the KO. Urshifu then dies to poison, and I bring Incineroar back out. I predict them to protect Tatsugiri, and Raw switch Incineroar into Calyrex as they protect Tatsugiri. I Pollen Puff Calyrex for the healing, and Urshifu sleeps for another turn. I switch Calyrex to Incineroar as Urshifu stays sleeping, and Tatsugiri uses Muddy Water, knocking out my Incineroar as I Spore the Tatsugiri. Tatsugiri takes its sleep turn as I Rage Powder the Surging Strikes into my Amoonguss and set Trick Room up again. From this point on, Calyrex will have no problem cleaning up, winning me the game. That matchup is really tough, so it's a good sign that I can win in a matchup that's problematic. Round 4 I have to play against another Calyrex Shadow team, except this one seems to be a better matchup for me. They have Calyrex Shadow, Raging Bolt, Tinglu, Ogerpon, Rillaboom, and Dondozo. I want to prepare for the Yon Dondozo and the Santum Tinglu mode, but I also want to prepare for the Calyrex Shadow. This is the perfect time to use Goldengo. I lead Goldengo and Incineroar into their Calyrex and Dondozo. I protect my Goldengo with a Psyshock it, and Incineroar uses Knockoff into Calyrex, bringing it down to Focus Sash. And Dondozo Wave Crashes Incineroar for some chip. I switch Goldengo into Urshifu, wanting to preserve Goldengo for later as they taunt my Incineroar with Calyrex, preventing my Parting Shot, and click Fissure into Urshifu, and it connects, bringing Urshifu down to Focus Sash on the switch in. This game went from very good to very bad very quickly. They switch Calyrex to Rillaboom as I protect Urshifu and knock off the Rillaboom. Dondozo then uses Wave Crash into my Protect. If I want to win this game, I have to make a really good play. I switch Urshifu to Calyrex as their Rillaboom clicks High Horsepower into it. Incineroar clicks Knockoff into Dondozo, and Dondozo Wave Crashes my Incineroar for the knockout. The thing with Goldengo is that they can Terra Fire, High Horsepower, and Wave Crash that spot for the KO. But if I Protect, that's really bad for them. However, if I Protect and they double the Calyrex, I'm in huge trouble. I could Terra the Goldengo, but if they read it and would hammer my Goldengo, then I'll probably lose the game on the spot. Either way, I need Goldengo alive to win. They Terra Fire their Rillaboom as a non-Terra Nasty Plot, and they double the Calyrex with Wood Hammer and Wave Crash. Thanks to the knockoff from earlier, I can use Make It Rain, and with the boost from Life Orb, I should be able to knock out their Rillaboom. I can then KO the Dondozo with High Horsepower. I click Make It Rain and knock out the Rillaboom and High Horsepower the Dondozo for the KO. They bring in Calyrex Shadow and Ogerpon Fire. I Terra my Goldengo to normal to avoid Astral Barrage and hope they don't crit the Ivy Cudgel. They go for Astral Barrage, knocking out my Calyrex and go for Power Whip on Ogerpon. Wait, Power Whip? I didn't read the team sheet, and thanks to Grassy Terrain boost, Power Up takes my Gholdengo out after the Life Orb chip damage. Luckily, I have Urshifu in the back, and Sucker Punch finishes the game. That game was won by that call with Gholdengo, but that matchup is a little shaky. Hopefully I can dodge her from that point on. Round 5, I pull another Miraidon, supported by Whimsicott, Iron Hands, Farigiraf, Ogerpon Fire, and Water Urshifu. I lead Calyrex Amoonguss into the Miraidon and Farigiraf. They Helping Hand the Miraidon as I double protect, and they Volt Switch into my Calyrex. I Rage Powder to redirect the Volt Switch as they switch into Iron Hands and Psychic Noise Amoonguss, and once again, it barely hangs on. I switch Amoonguss to Incineroar and protect Calyrex, but they get the call right, and Foul Play my Calyrex and Drain Punch my Incineroar, breaking it to very low HP. I Terra Calyrex to take less damage from Foul Play as I knock off Iron Hands. They Foul Play my Calyrex, and I finish the Iron Hands off with high horsepower. They bring in Urshifu, and I switch Calyrex to Amoonguss as they protect Urshifu, and Will-O-Wisp goes into their protect. They Psychic Noise Incineroar, getting the call wrong, hoping to catch the Amoonguss switch in. They Helping Hand Surging Strikes my Calyrex, knocking it out. And without Calyrex, I can't win this game. And the rest of my team falls shortly after. This is a wake-up call. Not only am I one win away from making top cut, but this matchup is also not as good as I thought. The Miraidon player can win if they get a few calls right, but in best of 1, it's hard to know whether to go for the obvious move or to make the mind game predictions. Round 6, I pull another Miraidon, but this time it has Whimsicott, Urshifu Rapid, Iron Leaves, Incineroar, and Iron Hands. This game starts with my Calyrex and Amoonguss against their Miraidon and Iron Hands. Since Electric Terrain is up, Electric Seed activates on Iron Hands. This Iron Hands doesn't have Fake Out, but it has Swords Dance and Protect instead. I Rage Powder and the Volt Switch goes into Amoonguss, as they bring in Incineroar and I Glacial Lance and they click Swords Dance. I switch Amoonguss to Incineroar and protect Calyrex, as they Fake Out Calyrex and Drain Punch Incineroar for the KO. I bring Amoonguss back in and click Rage Powder. Iron Hands protects as they knock off my Amoonguss and I high horsepower the Incineroar. I switch Iron Hands in for Amoonguss and protect Calyrex as they double it with Volt Switch and Drain Punch. They protect the Iron Hands and switch Miraidon to Urshifu as I fake out the Urshifu and high horsepower the Iron Hands. They Surging Strikes my Calyrex and I high horsepower their Iron Hands, but it isn't enough to pick up the KO, and they Drain Punch my Iron Hands. I knock out their Iron Hands next turn, but unfortunately it's too late, and Terra Fairy Miraidon cleans up the game. Another loss. If I lose my next one, I'm eliminated from the tournament. Round 7, I pull one of my worst matchups. Zamazenta, Urshifu Rapid, Shenpao, Farigiraf, Rillaboom, and Pelipper. They lead Pelipper and Farigiraf into my Gholdengo and Amoonguss. My plan is to use Gholdengo and Amoonguss to set up and take out Zamazenta, since I don't really have many other answers to it. I predict them to Helping Hand Hurricane my Amoonguss to get rid of it, which is really bad for me. So I switch out into Calyrex Ice, not wanting either Amoonguss or my Iron Hands in the back to take the hit. However, they go for Terra Grass, Helping Hand, Weather Ball into Gholdengo. Since I click Nasty Plot, Gholdengo dies without doing any damage, and suddenly, I'm a Pokemon down in my worst matchup. And it's my key piece. This is looking really bad. I need to make some kind of play. I bring in Amoonguss and protect it in front of the Helping Hand Hurricane and click Glacial Lance, killing the Pelipper. They bring in Zamazenta. They protect Zamazenta and I Glacial Lance to KO the Farigiraf, and Spore goes into the protect. They reveal Shenpao as their last. Suddenly, I see a way to win. If they go for any attack with Shenpao, then they take Rocky Helmet damage and die to an attack from Calyrex. They're also probably going to use Heavy Slam on Amoonguss instead of Body Press, but even if they Body Press, I should still live. I Terra Water my Amoonguss and click Rage Powder as they Ice Spinner and Body Press the Amoonguss, but it lives. I click Trick Room with Calyrex, and now I have a free Spore into Zamazenta and I high horsepower into Shenpao to win the game. So, I did it. I made it to top cut, but I'm not just going to give up. Since I started so well at 4-0, my resistance, also known as the tiebreaker, is pretty good, meaning that I get a bye to top 16. In top 16, I pull a Miraidon. This is good for me since I have experience in the matchup, and the tournament is now best of 3. Their team is Miraidon, Whimsicott, Urshifu Water, Ogerpon Fire, Farigiraf, and Iron Hands. This seems familiar. I lead Amoonguss and Calyrex as usual, and they lead Miraidon and Farigiraf. I Rage Powder the Volt Switch into Amoonguss as they Foul Play my Amoonguss, and I high horsepower the Iron Hands. They switch their Iron Hands into Urshifu and Psychic Noise my Amoonguss as I double protect. They switch Urshifu back to Iron Hands as I switch my Amoonguss for Iron Hands, and they Psychic my Iron Hands, and I Glacial Lance, taking out their Iron Hands. Wow, I said Iron Hands a lot in that sentence. They bring Miraidon in and I protect Calyrex. They Volt Switch my Iron Hands and Psychic Noise it, knocking it out. I bring Amoonguss in and Rage Powder as they Terra Stellar close combat it, but Glacial Lance picks up Farigiraf and they can't win from this point. Game 2 opens with the same leads, and I get a little greedy and don't protect Calyrex. They Volt Switch Calyrex and bring in Ogerpon and then Psychic Calyrex, but I crit them with Glacial Lance on the Ogerpon, doing tons of damage and bringing Ogerpon to red HP. I switched Calyrex to Incineroar as they would hammer my Incineroar, knocking themselves out with recoil. They Psychic my Amoonguss, but I live, and Pollen Puff their Frigoraph. They bring in Miraidon and Helping Hand Volt Switch into my Rage Powdered Amoonguss, knocking it out. I bring in Incineroar to intimidate the incoming Iron Hands. I switch Incineroar out to Iron Hands as they foul play my Calyrex for the knockout, and Wild Charge my Iron Hands. I bring in Incineroar as they switch Iron Hands out into Miraidon, as Knockoff takes out their Frigoraph and I low kick the incoming Miraidon for insane damage. They tear Miraidon to Fairy, but I tear Iron Hands to Grass to survive the Dazzling Gleam, and Incineroar Will-O-Wisps their Iron Hands as Drain Punch finishes the Miraidon. From this point on, they can't win the 1v2, and I win the game, the set, and advance to top 8. In top 8, I pull a matchup that looks really good on paper. Fluttermane, Amoonguss, Urshifu, Dark, Incineroar, Terapagos, and Whimsicott. They lead Incineroar and Terapagos into my Calyrex and Amoonguss. This looks pretty decent for me. I decide to double protect to see what the Terapagos goes for since it's choice specs, and I catch the Terra Stellar. They also Flare Blitz my Amoonguss with Incineroar. I switch Amoonguss into Incineroar as they Terra Starstorm and knock off Calyrex. I did not expect it to do that much. I got Trick Room up, but Calyrex has just taken so much damage. I protect Calyrex and knock off the Terapagos to limit their damage output, but they just Starstorm and Flare Blitz my Calyrex. I go for Glacial Lance and knock off on their Incineroar, but it's not enough, and they get a double KO. I can't win from this point, and I lose the game. Game 2 opens up with Terapagos, Incineroar against Incineroar and Amoonguss. I fake out their Incineroar as they Hyper Beam my Amoonguss and KO it from full HP. I send in Urshifu to threaten lots of damage, but this spot isn't good. I close combat the Incineroar since I can easily abuse the Hyper Beam and knock out the Terapagos. They bring in Amoonguss and Rage Powder as I protect Urshifu and they get the call on Hyper Beam correct, taking out my Incineroar too. I bring in Calyrex and go for Sucker Punch with Urshifu in order to avoid breaking my own Focus Sash on their Rocky Helmet, and go for Glacial Lance, but they live. I wasn't familiar with that damage calc and I thought they'd die for sure. I protect Urshifu as they Hyper Beam my Calyrex and I live. I Glacial Lance and take out their Amoonguss and they bring in their Dark Urshifu. We trade Terapagos for Calyrex, but their Urshifu is faster, and I lose the game, the set, and am eliminated from the tournament. Even though I didn't win, I exceeded my expectations. Calyrex Ice felt good, but I think the archetype needs innovation in order to succeed. Thank you all for watching.